into it. This morning in front of me, I have Kimberly Davis, who is the executive vice president at the NHL. She's doing social impact. She has a fantastic career, 30 plus years in both the financial industry and the sports world. Now, your accolades, just reading off, I'm going to read some of them because you have some phenomenal accolades, including Hockey News 2010 Top 100 Most Influential Leaders in Sport, Adweek's 30 Most Powerful Women in Sports, Sports Business Journal, Game Changers, the Business Journal's 100 Most Influential Women, and the list goes on. You are a phenomenal woman. Thank you so much for coming on to the Black Sports Network and doing this interview. We aim to celebrate you while you're still here and celebrate all that you have accomplished in the field and beyond. So thank you so much for taking the time out to interview with us.
Well, thank you. I'm honored and appreciate your interest in wanting to have a conversation.
Absolutely. So to start off, what are three words, that describe Kim Davis?
Ooh, well, let's see. I would start with humble. I think that's critically important. I would say resilient, and I would say flexible.
Okay. And why those three words?
Well, I start with humble because I think it is important for any leader to be humble first, for them to understand that to whom much is given, much is required. And so I carry humility as really a core part of my being and who I am. I say resilient because, over the course of both my life and my career, I have had a number of career changes and pivots, a lot having to do with disruption and change in industries that I've been part of. And I like to say I not only survived, but I thrived.
Absolutely.
And I owe that to resiliency. And resiliency, in my opinion, and flexibility go hand in hand. I think in order to be resilient, you have to be comfortable in being able to pivot and to be flexible.
Yes.
And understand that careers are not straight lines. Often they are very, very jagged roads with a lot of bumps and turns. But as long as you stay true to what I call my 3 Ps, that is preparation, passion, and purpose, you will, in the end of the day, be both happy and satisfied.
I love that. Now, getting into your career, you have worked in multiple industries in various roles across your career, and now you're currently at the National Hockey League. Now, what brings you the most fulfillment about the work that you do and why?
Yeah. Well, I have to say the most fulfillment that I get working here, and I've been with the National Hockey League for 3 years, are the almost daily calls that I receive from parents, particularly parents of kids of color, underrepresented folks in the sport of hockey. Just talking about how something that I've said or something that I've done or something that we're doing is impacting how their child is feeling more welcomed and a sense of belonging to the sport of hockey. And to me, that just makes all the difference in the world, because this is really about the future.
Absolutely.
So that really keeps me motivated, and it really, in many ways, is my reason for being here.
Absolutely. I love that. Just being able to hear that feedback from people and know that you're impacting those lives in such a significant way, because that's awesome. I mean, I knew about it, but growing up, it wasn't necessarily as accessible to play hockey or be skating or whatever. And I think it's awesome that you are creating this more, I don't know, equitable kind of atmosphere to bring this sport to different communities, which is amazing. And that's a perfect segue into my next question for you. You know, we've all had to pivot. This year alone has been so much, to say the least. We've had a pandemic, we've had social injustices in the election. It's been a lot physically, emotionally, spiritually. It has been a lot. How are you doing? You know, what drives you to get through your day despite all that's going on in the world?
Yeah, well, I'm doing fine. It is tough being isolated when you think about the fact that it's almost a year now that we have been in this pandemic, and the pandemic has had so many elements to it, right? The health pandemic, but also the racial pandemic has
absolutely
to it, and that has been trying.
Mm-hmm.
I have been blessed and fortunate enough to have had my first grandchild born.
Oh, congrats.
And so that has brought me great joy, and I think reestablished our whole purpose for being as a family, as we think about little Liam and making the future bright for him. You know, these COVID babies, as we call them, those in 2020, really help us understand what our responsibility is to be what I often call movement makers, and to make sure that the future is really bright, and that we use our power and our privilege, but also that we are brave and courageous in standing for things that are important, so that indeed the future is bright for Liam and others like himself. So
absolutely.
good.
I love that. I love it. I love it, you know, because this time has been difficult, and I love that you're encouraged and you're optimistic and everything. Now, you know, like I've kind of said earlier, we've all had to pivot. How has this kind of affected your work at all at the NHL? And how have you all, you know, tried to reach people virtually with social impact and, you know, all of that fantastic stuff? Because right now we're in a virtual world, and that's kind of what it's looking like for the next, I don't know, few months or years. I don't know. So how have you all kind of had to pivot, and what's that kind of look like within the work that you do?
Yeah. I've often described the past year as a point of acceleration for the National Hockey League. And I use that term because we were absolutely on a trajectory of change before the pandemic struck. I've been with the league for 3 years. You know, part of my responsibility has been to amplify voices that have not been heard, but also to tell the stories of people in our sport, particularly from underrepresented groups that people have assumed have not been part of the sport. So just quickly as an example, because we stand in Black History Month.
Absolutely.
You know, what people don't often know is that there is a rich history of Blacks in the sport of hockey going back to the late 1800s.
Wow.
The Colored Hockey League, which was born out of freed slaves that migrated to Nova Scotia, Canada, primarily from the Carolinas, have a rich history in the sport of hockey that dates back to before the National Hockey League was formed.
Wow.
And these courageous leaders in Nova Scotia, who centerpiece their hockey play around the Black church, were responsible for a lot of the innovations in the sport of hockey. And that story has not been told. It was written about some years ago by 2 white Canadians, the Fozzie brothers, in a book called Black Ice.
Wow.
But many people had not been exposed to the book and the story. And so we've used this opportunity of us being in this virtual environment to educate, to inform, to inspire. It has allowed us, because people's attention has been different, to have uncomfortable and difficult conversations about social issues, about racial injustice, about economic injustice in ways that I think had we not been in this moment, we may not have had the same listening. So, you know, there are, as I often say, there have been many blessings of COVID. And for me, one of them has been the opportunity for us to have these rich and difficult conversations that I think will propel our sport, the sport of hockey, in years to come.
I love that. That literally, you just answered my next question for you, just about social justice and equity, because, we've been fighting two pandemics this year, obviously, and it's been a lot to not only see it, but like you said, what is to come? What are the actions that are kind of coming behind, all the things that are going on that we're seeing in the media and everything. And it seems like, you all have put your words into action, which is amazing. And even though it's virtually, it's still making a significant impact because we've had this time to slow down and just be able to reflect and be able to, put some things down and put it to action. Now, we know that, at the local level, it's crucial, sometimes more crucial than the national and federal level when we talk about social impact, right? Now, what community-based actions are to come for the NHL for social impact? Like, how is that kind of panning out around this current landscape?
Yeah. Well, as hopefully your listenership knows, there are 31, soon to be 32 clubs that make up the National Hockey League.
Mm-hmm.
The 32nd club is the Seattle Kraken, which
Mm-hmm.
will come online in 2022.
Mm-hmm.
And to your point, the real work happens at the local level. The real
Absolutely.
work on the ground at the club level.
Mm-hmm.
And so what we've tried to do at the league level is to put forth frameworks and models
Mm-hmm.
that build some consistency in practice
Mm-hmm.
across the 32 clubs. And we're already seeing that play out in very, very substantive ways. If you look at, for example, work that the LA Kings are doing, the LA Kings hired the first ever Black female scout, Blake
Wow.
Bolden,
Wow.
who was a former professional women's hockey player.
That's awesome.
The scout. We see work that's happening in Pittsburgh on the ground
Mm-hmm.
with the creation of an elite hockey program focused on kids of color, specifically focused on building a pipeline of talent. We see the hiring of the first Hispanic CEO in the history of the league with the Arizona Coyotes, Javier Gutierrez.
Mm-hmm.
So they're just I've cited a couple of examples, but I could cite triple those where we see action happening at the club level, impacted by this sort of collective effort that we have across the league. And so I'm encouraged because there is great consistency in practice that is emanating from the league level that is being deployed at the local level, and that gives me a lot of encouragement.
I love it. I love it. I love it. That's fantastic. Now, you are the Executive Vice President of Social Impact, Growth Initiatives, and Legislative Affairs at the National Hockey League. A fantastic title. What does it mean?
Right. A mouthful of marbles, but
absolutely. But so many, like, you have your hands on so many different things. Now, what does this mean to be a Black woman in a high profile position of leadership? And what are the, some of the challenges that kind of come with that, with being a Black female authoritative figure in one of the biggest sports, leagues in the world?
Mm-hmm. Well, look, first, the title. A lot of words that simply mean that at the end of the day, I have responsibility for helping the sport of hockey reach new audiences and grow fan base, particularly with underrepresented groups. We know, for example, that currently 40% of hockey fans are women. We know that approximately 25% of our current hockey fan base are people of color, BIPOC. And so one part of my job is to educate our current fan base on the ways in which they can be allies and stand up and to feel welcomed in stadiums across North America. Absolutely. As importantly, though, how do we create this movement across the sport, particularly with allies? Look, the sport of hockey can't advance unless we build allyship. 93% of our players are white. And so we ought to be, in my opinion, the standard bearer for sports of how you embed inclusion in your culture. We have an opportunity to do that because of our makeup, which is very different, as you know, from any other sport. And so it's my responsibility as a Black woman to, number one, to be bold and courageous.
Absolutely.
To be able to not only have, but lead uncomfortable conversations around the executive table. There's no reason for me to be there if I'm not going to use the power and the privilege of that position in order to educate and to affect change. And I've already seen it. There are two senior executive women that sit around the commissioner's table, myself and Heidi Browning, who's the chief marketing officer, who also came from outside of sport a year before me. And in the 3 years I've been there, I've seen the conversation change because of our being there. So representation counts.
Absolutely.
Right? Having people that are different sitting around the executive table, diversity brings strength. And so it's my responsibility to push the envelope, to be a change maker, for me to, as I said, to educate and to inspire my colleagues, and to, in many ways, be a coach around these issues, because that's the way change is going to occur in our sport.
Absolutely. I think that's everything, because people, understanding diversity and inclusion, the more diverse and inclusive that you are, whether it's with hiring or, your teams or your executive teams, et cetera, the more that you're going to get out of the situation, the more productive you'll be, the more, you'll increase sales, the more you'll have a diverse, just thinking and perspective that will, eventually, trickle down to everyone else and create that culture that you want to embody every single day. So I love that. I think it's phenomenal. Now, pivoting a little bit, this interview will air during Women's History Month, a month that oftentimes does not highlight Black women enough and the beautiful intersections that we have to offer. When you think of celebrating Women's History Month, what stands out to you in your mind that is a part of our history that you can relate to?
Yeah, I'm so glad you raised that notion of intersectionality, because I am the biggest proponent of educating everyone about intersectionality. And I think it starts with the intersection of gender, race, and ethnicity. It's one of the most powerful intersections, and one of the ones that has been least amplified for its power. Black women have been major contributors in every aspect and every walk of life, including sports, and we haven't been amplified or illuminated. I use the example of Blake Bolden in the sport of hockey, who was the first Black female to be on professional, both Canadian and U.S. team. And yet, when I talked about her to some of our owners, they had never heard of her.
Wow.
We know that intersection of race, ethnicity, and gender for Black women is what I've often referred to as a triple threat.
Absolutely.
And it shows up in the data. We know that from Fortune 500 board seats, where white women represent 19% and Black women represent 3%, to pay equities where white women are 81 cents on the dollar and women of color are 54 cents.
Yes.
There's something about that triple threat that we have to understand and we have to talk about. We have to educate around and illuminate. And I'm big for making sure that we use Gender Equality Month as a way to talk about intersectionality.
Absolutely. I think, intersections are everything. You have to acknowledge a person's intersection, because when you do that, you bring so much more to the table with, who they are. And Black women are amongst some of we are the most educated, group out there, right? But oftentimes, like you said, not the most amplified, not the, underappreciated, the list goes on. And we definitely have to change that. And it's important to acknowledge that and also put it to action. Now, you've been in this industry for quite some time. You have some fantastic experience. Please share some advice with the young women coming behind you that want to do this work, that, want to shake the table and continue to, just reach higher heights.
Well, the first thing I will say is that I see the sports industry broadly opening up to welcome people to enter it from outside of the industry. And I think that's really, really important. It's probably one of the few industries that hasn't seen skill set transferability as a strength. And so I would encourage young women from outside of sport who have, built skills in marketing and in analytics and in sales to think about sport as an avenue for them to continue to build their careers. That's number one. Number two, those people that have long loved sports and played sports and gone to school and pursued sports management as a field. I think the field is ripe. I think it's open, but you have to be willing to put your shoulder to the wheel and to dig deep. It's going to take a willingness to be able to move around organizations, maybe even to change leagues, to get the experience that is going to be necessary to be successful. But don't give up, prevail, and use your networks effectively and build those networks. That doesn't mean just connecting with people on LinkedIn, but be intentional about what you want from people and what you're asking them to do, and have a plan.
Absolutely.
Have a plan of how you're going to manage your career the same way you would manage a marketing product. I call it me. And you have to be intentional every day about doing something to advance your career and to build your network. And I think those are the tactical things that really make careers blossom.
Absolutely. I love that advice. It's so crucial. Now, you said some really interesting things in that whole thing. And I want to ask, as a woman who is in a high up position in a sports league that is predominantly male, like, how do you navigate those situations? And do you have advice for young women in regards to that? Sometimes being the only one, sometimes being one of few in a room that is predominantly male, and trying to get your voice heard, get the agenda across the table. What advice do you have in that regard?
Yeah. Well, I mean, the biggest advice I would say is have confidence in yourself. It all starts with your own sense of value and self-worth. And when you feel strong about yourself, no one can really take that away from you. For 35 years, I've been either the first or the only one.
Wow.
Going back to the beginning of my career, the first in the financial program, the first in the SVP at JP Morgan. I mean, there's so many firsts. There's so many lonely places that I've been where I've been the only person of color or the only woman or the combination of both in boardrooms. And it's very easy to question yourself, to doubt yourself. It's really easy to sit there and to, just go over and over and over in your mind about how you're positioning yourself to ask a question, and should I ask it? And, by the time you're wrestling with each side, each angel on each shoulder, someone, and usually it's a white guy, has asked the exact same question that you were going to ask. And you say, darn it, that was my question.
Right.
Don't doubt yourself. Ask the question. 9 out of 10 times it's going to be the right question. And by the way, it's going to be the question that everybody else in the room wants to ask and they're afraid to. And
Absolutely.
so it takes that kind of courage and bravery throughout our careers. And it never stops. No matter how senior you are, there are going to be moments where you're going to feel afraid and vulnerable. It still happens to me, and I'm a 60-year-old woman. And yet I have to push myself to say, don't stand in your own way. Get out of your way. And those words are words of encouragement to yourselves. And then you build a network of folks around you that affirm you, so that when you have those moments of self-doubt, you can talk to people and their stories will relate to yours, and you will know that you are not alone. Even though you may be the only one in that room, you are not alone in this world.
Yes. Yes. Ah, that was so affirming. That was so affirming in terms of, just pushing past the imposter syndrome, pushing past all the doubt that, as humans, we all have it.
That's
But,
right.
when we talk about women and Black women and just, being the only sometimes or a lot of times being able to get outside of yourself, push that imposter syndrome to the side and keep rising to the top. Like that is the epitome. That is everything. And so thank you for saying that. I know it will resonate with plenty of people when this airs. Now, the last question that I have for you is, when it's all said and done, when you think of your own legacy, what do you want your legacy to be?
Well, I one of my favorite hashtags, and I use it constantly in my social media is this is a movement, not a moment.
Yes.
I take serious this idea of people, individuals being movement makers. And to me, a movement maker is someone that doesn't just focus on, supporting people today, but you're also always thinking about the future. You're always thinking about not only the here and now, but what the future needs to be and how you can impact that. And so what I'd like people to be able to say about me when I'm no longer here is that she was a movement maker, that wherever she went, she was always willing to kick up enough dust to create enough good trouble that really allowed whatever environment or institution that she was a part of to be open to change, to be willing to confront itself, and to be better at the end of that. And if I can have a small part in being a movement maker, that will be big for me.
I love that. Movement makers. Let's do it. It's so empowering. It's so empowering. I'm feeling so good coming into 2021. Just movement maker. Let's do it. Now, I have some quick fire questions for you. This or that format. Basically, you have to answer in one sentence or less or one word or less. Are you ready?
I'm ready.
Okay. What is your favorite NHL team?
Kraken.
All right. Who's your favorite female athlete?
Billie Jean King.
Very good choice. Favorite place that you have traveled?
South Africa.
That's awesome. A social impact initiative that you really care about or you're really excited about?
There's so many. Young Black men achievement.
Ooh, okay. I'll have to look into that. What would you do if you weren't doing what you're doing now?
Interior design.
Really? That's so cool. I love interior design. Okay. What would you, excuse me. First thing you're doing once COVID is officially over, like we can actually go outside, no masks, just breathing the air. What are you going to be doing first?
Planning a vacation.
Yes. Getting out of the Northeast and going somewhere warm.
Exactly. Oh my God. I can't wait.
Oh, yes, absolutely. Last one. What's the best piece of advice that you have ever gotten?
Today is the first day of the rest of your life.
Wow. And that is the end. That is the end. Kim Davis, thank you so much. You were phenomenal. Thank you for dropping so many gems and taking the time out of your very busy schedule to be here with us today at the Black Sports Network. We applaud you. We appreciate you and honor you during Women's History Month. So thank you, thank you, thank you.
Thank you.
Absolutely. I'm going to end this.